Welcome back to Sputnik. Dennis Halliday is one of the most noble men I've ever known. An Irishman, he spent decades in the United Nations, reaching the dizzy heights of Assistant Secretary General. He was posted to Iraq during the Oil for Food programme to avert a catastrophe in which an Iraqi child was dying every 6 minutes of every day and night through sanctions. Dennis took a good look around. He did everything that he could before deciding he couldn't take it anymore. It would not be done in his name. And he walked, becoming one of the few men in public life to voluntarily walk away from a position of such importance. Gayatri and I caught up with Dennis Halliday when he passed through London just last week. And I started out by asking him, do we really have a United Nations anymore? It has a big building, even bigger budgets, but it might as well not be there for all the good that it's doing.
Yes, I hate to admit that, of course, I have to agree with that. But let me just say there are two United Nations. The United Nations of the member states. This is a states-organized, paid-for, managed function. The Secretary General and the staff is actually the second part of the equation. The states, in my view, in terms of the real issues, the peace, security, well-being, human rights, working through the Security Council, have failed. In fact, they're showing signs, I would say, of corruption. And that's the tragedy.
Well, let's deal with the core of the problem. We have a situation now where 3 out of the 5 permanent members are now repeatedly declaring war on other states without now even putting the matter before the Security Council, never mind taking its agreement or assent to these policies. Yet these 5 permanent members have a veto forever on whether or not the Security Council should be refashioned, remodeled, reformed, or even abolished.
Well, this is our problem. We now have member states who are not taking proper, attention, not paying proper attention to the Charter. The Charter makes it very clear in Chapter 7. Aggressive warfare, acts of aggression, going to war, preemptive strikes, whatever it's called nowadays, is totally in violation of international law, in violation of the Charter, in violation of the membership. And as veto members of the 5 veto powers, for them to break these laws, for them to go to war without endorsement of the Security Council is doubly dangerous and doubly undermining of the whole organization and the purpose of the organization, particularly, as I said before, in the Security Council, which is so fundamental to world peace, where we do not have representation. We do not have democracy, if you can believe that. We've allowed these 5 veto powers, the so-called victors of the Second World War, to stay in power, to control the essential part of this organization.
Well, that's a problem, but an even bigger problem is where any number of members of the permanent 5, I've cited 3, the United States, Britain and France, because they have been repeatedly doing it, are doing it right now in Syria and arguably in Iraq, decide that if they can't get out from under the veto power of the other members of the permanent 5, well, they'll just go and do what they want anyway.
Yeah, this is what underlines, I think, most the failure of the Council and the corruption of the Council, that you have member states who are veto member states, permanent member states, and have been since 1945, are willing now to corrupt this Charter and go behind the regulations of the Charter, which prevent any form of warfare, whether it's wars of aggression, genocidal, or whatever, happening without permission of the member states, as per the Charter, as per the other arrangements that the Security Council functions within. To me, this is the end of the value added of the Security Council, because what example does that set for the other countries, perhaps smaller countries who want to aggress against a neighbor, who want to take on some issue, who want to take on some aggressive role? I mean, if the leadership and those held most responsible do not respect the Charter, why should anybody else?
Well, let's take one of those smaller countries, Israel, which came into being as the result of a decision of the United Nations, in just the last few months, has broken the Charter, has broken extant Security Council resolutions, has killed United Nations personnel, has destroyed United Nations facilities in Gaza, in fact, over and over again, and yet at the next meeting of the United Nations can walk up the red carpet as a PACA member state. No one threatens them with expulsion. No one threatens them with suspension or any sanction of any kind. How can that happen?
It happens, unfortunately, because the United States gives blind support to Israel. There's no capacity in Congress or in the White House to correct or punish or hold back Israel, for the internal domestic politics of the United States is held by the lobbies financed by Israel, often with American money, as a matter of fact. So the Americans are afraid to deal with Israel as Israel should be dealt with, because Israel is, as you said, in violation of just about every international convention, the Charter itself. So they go in there and they kill 450 children, for example, recently in Gaza. And do we get, does the world stop? No. Does the UN pay real attention? No. Some wishy-washy statement comes out saying, regrettably, this and that and whatever. And in Gaza itself, the UNRWA, the UN agency, has been educating and feeding and supporting these thousands of refugees for some 40 years. So the UN is actually being attacked. The schools were bombed by Israel. And again, Israel walks free. And it's all because Washington, and Britain to a certain extent, and maybe some other Europeans, are afraid to deal with Israel because of the confusion and the history of the Jewish people, the Jewish state, the Holocaust, all of that complexity. But they can't face the reality that Zionism is something that's got to be dealt with.
Let's go back to the issue of structure. How can you have a Security Council where some of the world's biggest countries, indeed its second biggest country, is not in the Permanent Five, it's permanently locked out of the Permanent Five? How can Germany, the greatest economy in Europe, not be in the Security Council? Brazil, the greatest country in Latin America, locked out permanently of the Security Council. Surely these kind of demands now need to be raised. That if you're going to have a Security Council, if you're going to have any permanence, a Permanent Five, it'll need to be the Permanent 10.
Well, you see, as you know better than I probably, the stranglehold of the 5 permanent members goes back to Yalta, when Roosevelt, Stalin and Churchill met and decided, given the failure of the League, they were going to sort out the future, have a United Nations which they would control. And that by adding France as a gesture to de Gaulle, and by adding China, they created this 5 veto power permanent seat for themselves. And they're still in business, if you speak. They're still controlling the UN. The BRIC countries that you've mentioned, other large countries, are not represented. The North-South balance is just not there. There is no democracy. I mean, it sounds like revolution when you talk about democracy in the context of the Security Council. But the South needs to be represented on a permanent basis, or at least with the same strength. I mean, I have a suggestion for that if you want to get into it.
Tell us, how can we solve this?
Yeah, I believe what we have to do is to abolish the present 5. We have to have regional seats in the Security Council. So North America would have 1 permanent seat. Canada, the United States, Mexico would have to decide who sits on that seat. And when one of them when the country sitting speaks, that country will represent the 3. Latin America would have 1 seat. Maybe Costa Rica would be selected to sit on that seat. But when Costa Rica spoke, she would speak for the whole of Latin America, and so on for Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, the Middle East. You could visualize a very different body with some democracy at work and representation, no veto power. And I think we'd find very different decisions. And these wars of aggression that we undertake would simply, in my view, be changed. That would not happen, I don't believe. We need that desperately, and it's not on the cards, because the change of the Security Council and its makeup is built into the Charter, and only the member states, the permanent member states, can change the Charter. So they're very, very tightly it up to serve their own interests. It's quite extraordinary.
Dennis Halliday, I salute you.
Thank you.